A Hell's Angel was the last person anyone expected to save her life, especially hers. And yet on a forgotten stretch of highway outside Black Ridge, under a sky split open by thunder, that is exactly what happened. Long before the headlines whispered about unlikely heroes and before an entire police department was forced to question everything it thought it knew about loyalty and labels, there was only a storm, a wrecked patrol SUV, and a man most people crossed the street to avoid. The desert wind howled across State Route 67 just after midnight, rain slashing sideways across the asphalt, when the deep, unmistakable rumble of a Harley-Davidson cut through the darkness like a warning. Marcus Grimm, Callahan rode alone that night, leather vest heavy against his shoulders, the red and white Hell's Angels patch stark against the lightning-lit sky, his gloved hands steady on the handlebars as he made the long ride back from a chapter meet 2 towns over. He wasn't thinking about trouble. He wasn't looking for redemption. He was thinking about nothing at all, letting the miles numb him the way the road always did. Most drivers had already cleared off that stretch of highway because of the storm, leaving only sheets of rain and scattered debris swirling across the lanes. But as Marcus rounded a bend near mile marker 214, something unnatural broke the rhythm of the road. A black and white patrol vehicle crumpled against the guardrail at an angle no vehicle should ever sit. Headlights shattered, emergency bar dark, one tire still spinning uselessly in the mud. For half a second, instinct told him to keep riding. A biker stopping at a police crash scene was the kind of thing that complicated life in ways that never ended well. But then lightning flashed, and in that brief, blinding white light, he saw her. A figure 20 feet from the SUV, lying unnaturally still on the soaked gravel shoulder. He slowed. The engine's growl softened into a low idle. Rain hammered against his helmet as he killed the ignition, and suddenly the world felt too quiet except for thunder rolling across the desert. Marcus swung his leg over the bike and stepped into the storm, boots splashing through shallow puddles as he approached cautiously, every sense alert. The woman wore a Black Ridge Police Department uniform, the fabric torn at the shoulder, her badge catching a flicker of reflected lightning. Officer Lena Morales, though he did not yet know her name, lay on her side, one hand outstretched toward the wrecked SUV as if she had tried to crawl back to it. Blood mixed with rainwater beneath her, forming thin crimson streams that ran toward the ditch. Marcus knelt immediately, years of instinct from a rough life telling him what mattered and what didn't. Her pulse. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Fate. To fate. Her breathing came shallow and uneven, each inhale sounding like it cost her something she didn't have left to give. A quick glance told him more. The driver's door hung open. Her service weapon was gone from its holster, her radio crushed beside the vehicle's rear tire. This wasn't just an accident. She had answered a call, probably alone, probably expecting backup that never made it in time. The desert swallowed sirens easily out here. Marcus pulled off his gloves, tossing them aside, and peeled back the torn fabric near her abdomen where the bleeding was worst. The wound was deep, the kind that stole minutes fast. He swore under his breath and stripped off his flannel shirt without hesitation, pressing the thick material hard against the injury, applying pressure the only way he knew how. Firm, relentless, unforgiving. Rain soaked them both instantly, but he didn't ease up. "Hey," he said, leaning close so his voice could cut through the storm. "Stay with me. Don't you quit." Her eyelids fluttered faintly, lips parting as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. He fumbled his phone from his vest pocket, hands slick with water and blood, and dialed 911. When dispatch answered, his voice was steady despite the cold biting through him. He gave the location, reported an officer down. There was a pause when he identified himself, a subtle shift in tone that told him exactly what they thought about a Hell's Angel calling in an injured cop, but he ignored it. "She's alive," he insisted. "But not for long if you don't move." He tossed the phone onto speaker and focused entirely on the rhythm of her breathing. Every few seconds he adjusted pressure, fighting the instinct to look down the highway for approaching headlights, fighting the urge to imagine the armed suspect still somewhere in the darkness watching from the desert brush. Lightning cracked again overhead, illuminating the patch on his back and the badge pinned crooked on her chest, 2 symbols of worlds that rarely collided without violence. And yet here he was, kneeling in the mud, holding together a life that represented everything his own reputation stood against. Minutes stretched thin. He spoke to her continuously, telling her to think about whoever was waiting at home, to think about unfinished paperwork, about coffee in the break room, about anything that would tether her to the world. He didn't know if she had family, didn't know if anyone even knew she was out here alone, but he refused to let her slip into the quiet. The storm intensified, wind whipping across the highway hard enough to rock his parked motorcycle, rain plastering his hair to his forehead as he leaned over her, shielding her face as best he could. Somewhere in the distance, faint at first, he heard it. Sirens. More than one. Growing louder. He exhaled slowly but did not release pressure. When the first patrol units screeched onto the scene, tires hissing against wet pavement, officers jumped out with weapons drawn, the sight before them almost impossible to process. A Hell's Angel covered in blood, kneeling over one of their own. Marcus didn't move abruptly. He didn't argue. He simply kept his hands where they were and looked up through the rain. "She's still breathing," he said evenly. And in that moment, before anyone knew how the night would end, before suspicion hardened into questions and cameras began pulling footage, before the department would whisper about the biker who could have ridden past but didn't, one undeniable truth had already taken shape on that dark desert highway. The man society feared most had chosen not to let a dying cop face the storm alone. The man they had spent years watching from a distance was now the only reason one of their own was still alive. And as red and blue lights flooded the storm-soaked highway, that reality hit the Black Ridge Police Department like a punch to the chest. Officers spilled out of their cruisers with weapons drawn, boots splashing through rainwater, commands cutting sharply through the wind. "Step away from her. Hands where we can see them." Marcus, grim, Callahan didn't argue, didn't flinch, didn't run. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his blood-covered hands while still keeping pressure with one palm as long as he could. "If I move too fast, she bleeds out," he said evenly, his voice steady despite the cold rain dripping from his jaw. For a fraction of a second, hesitation flickered across the nearest officer's face. Then the paramedics pushed forward, sliding into position beside Officer Lena Morales. One of them glanced at the wound and immediately shouted, "Who packed this?" Marcus nodded once. "I did." The medic looked up, rain streaming down his forehead. "It's the only reason she's still got a pulse." That sentence landed heavier than the thunder overhead. Two officers grabbed Marcus by the arms and pulled him back anyway, instinct and training overriding everything else. They guided him toward a patrol unit, not roughly, but not gently either. He didn't resist. He simply watched as paramedics worked frantically over Lena's motionless form, cutting away more of her uniform, securing oxygen, starting 4 lines with movements sharpened by urgency. Her face was pale beneath the flashing lights, lips tinged blue, chest rising shallowly under the oxygen mask. "BP's crashing," someone shouted. "Load her up." The stretcher wheels rattled against broken asphalt as they lifted her into the ambulance. Marcus stood in the rain, hands resting on the hood of a cruiser now, blood mixing with water and dripping down the metal. A sergeant approached, jaw tight, eyes scanning Marcus's vest, lingering on the Hell's Angels patch like it carried its own indictment. "Start talking," the sergeant demanded. "What happened out here?" Marcus kept his answer simple. He was riding through. He saw the crash. He found her on the ground. No weapon. No suspect. Just a dying officer in a storm. The sergeant studied his face as if searching for cracks in the story. "You expect me to believe you just happened to stop?" Marcus's gaze didn't waver. "Believe whatever you want. Check the traffic cams." And they did. Within 30 minutes, while Marcus sat in the back of a cruiser, not cuffed, but not free either, a patrol lieutenant reviewed highway camera footage from 2 miles back. The grainy black and white feed showed exactly what Marcus described. His motorcycle slowing as it approached the wreck, no other vehicles in sight, no sign of struggle between him and the officer. Timestamp confirmed he had arrived nearly 12 minutes before the first emergency call from a passing trucker who spotted the flashing ambulance lights later on. 12 minutes in which Lena Morales would have bled to death alone on the shoulder if no one had stopped. Back at the scene, rain finally began to ease, leaving behind a heavy silence broken only by radio chatter. Forensics started photographing the wreck. Clipped, urgent tones. The trauma chief later told the assembled officers in the waiting area that Officer Morales had lost a dangerous amount of blood. The wound had been deep, severing a vessel that would have emptied her in minutes. If whoever found her hadn't applied immediate pressure and packed the wound, the doctor said plainly, she wouldn't have made it through the ride here. The room fell silent. A detective folded his arms, staring at the tiled floor. Another officer muttered under his breath, disbelief mixing with reluctant gratitude. Meanwhile, Marcus sat alone on a metal bench near the vending machines, his cut now sealed in an evidence bag at his feet, having been temporarily taken for documentation. He wore a hospital blanket around his shoulders, water still dripping from his boots. A young patrol officer approached cautiously. You could have left, she said quietly. Marcus didn't look up at first. Yeah, he replied. I could have. The weight of that choice pressed into everyone present. Years of tension between the department and the local Hells Angels chapter hovered like an unspoken history. Traffic stops that escalated. Or fights. Surveillance operations. Courtrooms filled with mutual distrust. Yet tonight, the narrative didn't fit the file folders. The biker with a record of disorderly conduct and prior arrests for unlawful assembly had been the one kneeling in the mud, holding together a life that wore a badge. Near dawn, a captain arrived, gray-haired and stone-faced, having been briefed on the situation. He approached Marcus directly. You understand, the captain began carefully, why this is complicated. Marcus gave a faint nod. Always is. The captain studied him for a long moment before extending his hand, not as a gesture of friendship, but acknowledgement. She's in surgery. It's touch and go. Marcus shook the offered hand once, firm but brief. She's tough, he said simply. Morning crept slowly over Black Ridge, washing the desert in pale light as words spread through the department. Text messages buzzed across nightstands. Officers waking up learned the headline before the media ever did. Officer Morales critical. Saved by a Hells Angel. The irony stung and humbled in equal measure. Some refused to comment. Others sat quietly with the uncomfortable truth that bravery had come from a direction they'd spent years expecting danger from. By mid-morning, confirmation arrived. Lina Morales was out of surgery. Alive. Stable for now. When the announcement echoed through the waiting area, a collective breath released. Eyes turned, almost instinctively, toward Marcus. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply exhaled once, deeply, as if setting down a weight he'd been carrying since midnight. Outside, the storm clouds had finally cleared. But inside Black Ridge Police Department, something far less visible had begun to shift. A fracture in assumptions, a crack in hardened perceptions. Because no matter how anyone tried to frame it, the truth stood unmovable. When one of their own lay dying in the rain, it wasn't another squad car that reached her first. It was the man they least expected to kneel beside her and refuse to let go. The moment Officer Lina Morales asked to see the man with the Hells Angels patch, the entire Black Ridge Police Department felt the ground shift beneath its boots. It had been 3 weeks since the storm tore across State Route 67. 3 weeks since surgeons fought to keep her alive. 3 weeks of whispered conversations in hallways about the biker who stopped when no one else did. Lina's recovery had been slow but steady. Tubes removed one by one, stitches healing, color gradually returning to her face. And through it all, fragments of that night replayed in her mind. Headlights cutting through rain, a deep voice telling her not to quit, steady pressure against the wound, warmth in the cold. She didn't remember the crash clearly. She didn't remember losing her weapon. But she remembered the voice. When her captain visited her hospital room with an update on the investigation, the suspect apprehended 2 counties over, her firearm recovered. Internal review cleared her of procedural fault. She listened quietly, then surprised him with a simple request. I want to meet him. The captain hesitated. Lina, you know who he is. She held his gaze. I know what he did. That was harder to argue with. Arranging the meeting wasn't simple. Marcus, grim. Callahan had returned to his routine the day after the surgery update, refusing interviews, declining offers from reporters who caught wind of the story through scanner chatter. He hadn't saved her for attention. He hadn't saved her to make a statement. When the department reached out, asking if he would consider visiting, his first answer was no. I don't walk into police buildings, he said flatly. History had taught him that much. But when they explained, Lena specifically requested to see him. Not for publicity, not for a photo opportunity, but privately. He went quiet. A long pause stretched across the line before he finally said, "Hospital. Public place." So they arranged it. The afternoon he arrived, he didn't come in with an entourage or fanfare. Just boots, jeans, his leather vest unmistakable against the sterile white walls. Conversations in the hallway dimmed as officers standing guard outside Lena's room instinctively straightened. Some recognized him from the highway. Others only knew the patch. For a moment, decades of tension sat thick in the air. Then the door opened. Lena looked smaller than she had on patrol, hospital gown loose around her shoulders, a faint scar visible near her collarbone where surgeons had worked to repair internal damage. But her eyes were steady, clear, alive. Marcus stepped inside slowly, hands visible, posture respectful but unbowed. The room fell quiet except for the faint hum of medical equipment. For a second, they simply looked at each other. Two people from worlds that rarely overlapped without conflict. Lena spoke first. "You stayed." It wasn't a question. Marcus shrugged slightly. "Yeah." She studied his face as if matching it to the voice she remembered. "You could have ridden off." He met her eyes. Didn't seem right. Emotion flickered across her expression. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just real. "They told me what you did," she said softly. "The pressure, the shirt, the call." Marcus shifted his weight, uncomfortable with praise. Anyone would have. An officer near the doorway almost laughed at that, but stopped himself. Lena didn't smile. "Not anyone," she replied. Silence settled again, but this time it felt different, less guarded. She extended her hand slowly, careful of the foreline. After a brief hesitation, Marcus stepped forward and shook it. His grip was firm but gentle, aware of her fragility. In that small, ordinary gesture, something extraordinary happened. Suspicion gave way to acknowledgement. Not agreement, not alliance, just mutual respect. Outside the room, word spread quickly that the meeting was happening. Officers who once would have scoffed at the idea now found themselves curious, even thoughtful. The narrative they had grown used to, bikers on one side, badges on the other, didn't fit neatly anymore. Weeks later, when Lena was cleared for light duty and walked back into the precinct for the first time, applause filled the bullpen. It wasn't orchestrated. It just happened. She thanked her colleagues, hugged her partner, accepted the quiet congratulations. Then she asked a question that caught everyone off guard. "Is he here?" The captain nodded toward the back of the room. Marcus stood near the wall, uncomfortable under fluorescent lights, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Lena crossed the floor toward him. Every officer watched. She didn't make a speech. She didn't dramatize the moment. She simply faced him and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'm here because he stopped." No one argued. The captain stepped forward holding a small plaque. Nothing flashy, no press conference, no cameras, just a departmental recognition for civilian bravery. "Mr. Callahan," the captain said carefully, "the Black Ridge Police Department thanks you." Marcus accepted it with a nod, eyes scanning the room. Some officers met his gaze with lingering skepticism, but most offered something new, respect. It didn't erase old conflicts. It didn't rewrite history between the department and the Hells Angels. But it created a moment none of them could ignore. Later that evening, as Marcus walked back to his motorcycle parked outside the precinct, Lena stepped out behind him. "You know," she said, "my partner told me he almost drove past that spot before turning around. Storm was too bad. Visibility low." Marcus looked out at the horizon where the desert met the fading sun. "Storms do that," he replied. She considered that, then added, "I'm glad you didn't." He adjusted his gloves, preparing to leave. "Me too." As the engine roared to life and he rode off, something subtle but lasting remained behind. Training briefings in the department began referencing the incident, not as propaganda, not as myth, but as reminder. Courage isn't owned by one uniform. Humanity doesn't belong to one side. On that rain-soaked highway, titles and reputations meant nothing. There was only a choice, and a man who made it. The entire police force had expected conflict that night. Instead, they were given perspective. And sometimes, that can change more than any arrest ever could.